Hello everyone and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Craig Thaine as today's presenter. Co-author of Cambridge English in Power, Craig has been involved in ELT for 30 years. He has an MA Honours in Applied Linguistics and has worked as a teacher and teacher trainer in many different countries including England, Italy, Egypt, Sweden and New Zealand. He's currently Director of Teacher Training at Languages International in Auckland and is a Cambridge English Language Assessment Teaching Awards Assessor for both the CELTA and Delta schemes. So, over to you.
Thank you, Alistair, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. I can see that there are lots of people from different time zones, so some of you must be up late or very, very early. So thank you for doing that and joining in. I want to talk today about advanced learners, and what I'm going to focus on is a case study that I carried out at the school I work for in Auckland in New Zealand. I should point out that this is a case study and I'm dealing with a small group of learners and a small group of teachers. So I think it's quite difficult to generalize the points that came up in this case study, but I thought it would be interesting to share with you some of the ideas that the learners and the teachers I spoke to conveyed to me in terms of looking at some specific issues associated with advanced learners. So you might find that the advanced learners in your context behave differently or might have different views, but seeing the information that these learners have to share and that I'm sharing with you could be of some value and interest. So I'd like to start with a task. Into the chat box, could you just, in a very simple short phrase, write a description of what your idea of an advanced learner is? So everyone's typing. Confident, C1 level. Gifted, CAE, close to native speaker. Advanced structures. Independent user. Knows a lot of vocabulary and grammar. Excellent. So in fact, what I'm getting from you is quite a wide range of ways of thinking or talking about an advanced level learner. And in fact, when I began to think about this carefully before I even began the case study, I had a similar thoughts, I should say. So here are some different ways of describing advanced level learners, many of which, in fact, most of which I think have been mentioned already in the chat. So sometimes it's because of the class they are in at a specific school. However, in my experience in the past, sometimes I've worked in schools where there have been advanced learners, but in fact, if I think of them in terms of CEFR competence level, I would probably say that they are B1+. However, they were the strongest students in that school, therefore they were perceived as being advanced. So it can be the actual school context that determines whether someone is advanced or not. Quite a few of you have referred to the CEFR levels, and that now I think is quite a common way of defining an advanced learner, that they are at C2 or C2 level. That is their language level of competence. Some of you have also mentioned exams, so CAE or Cambridge Proficiency, or it could be an appropriate IELTS score, which would, I guess, for advanced would be around about 6.5 to 7. But another way of thinking about advanced learners is the context in which they use English. So they may work for a company in which they need to use English on a daily basis, or they may be studying using English language in their study, and they may be functioning very, very well in these contexts. So those are specific ways of defining or describing advanced level learners. I did some background reading on this, and Alan Maley published a book on advanced level learners, and as part of the preparation for his book, he sent out a questionnaire to I think about 200 odd teachers, and this is the conclusion that he reached. Unfortunately, there is no generally agreed definition of what advanced means. It seemed best to adopt a family resemblance approach whereby advanced learners might share some, but not all characteristics. And I think this is a very good way of talking about advanced learners, this idea of family resemblance. But I think what he's signaling here is that advanced learners often have very different needs. Therefore, it's very difficult to put them in the one box and sort of say that they're all like this. So that really is my starting point, is acknowledging the fact that advanced level learners are a little bit difficult to describe, and they don't all behave in exactly the same way, which is maybe a good thing. So let's move on and look at my case study, what the actual context where I got the information and the data. So I sent out 12 questionnaires to one class. I was not teaching this class at the time. I felt that was important because I thought I would get more honest answers, particularly when I came to talk about learning resources and methodology. So I got 5 replies from the 12 questionnaires. And with these 5 students, I did 2 hour and a half long group interviews with them where I kind of followed up on information from their questionnaires. The teachers were teachers working at the school I worked for in Auckland. And again, I sent out 15 questionnaires. I got 5 replies. So that in a way was quite neat in the sense that I got 5 replies from learners, 5 replies from teachers. And then with teachers, I took the 5 teachers, but other teachers that I worked with, and I ran 2 workshops, and we looked at some of their comments, but also some of the comments from the learners, and I got teachers to react to some of those comments. So that's how I carried out the case study. And these were the points that I was mostly interested in. So this issue of how you can define advanced, what are learners' skill needs at advanced level, what are learners' language needs at advanced level, and what resources and methodology is effective for them. Those were the key questions. So the learner profiles, the 5 learners that I worked with, they were at level 7 out of 8 levels in the school that I worked for. So they were in an advanced class. We also have a post-advanced class at C2 level. So more or less their language level of competence was C1 level. There were 3 women and 2 men. And I also had a great range of nationalities. 1 Brazilian student, 1 German, 1 Korean, 1 Swiss Italian, and 1 Thai learner. So I was very, very lucky in that sense. The teacher profiles, the 5 who responded, these teachers all had 5 years or more experience. They had taught all levels, so from absolute beginner to post-advanced, and they'd all taught specialist classes like business English or English for academic purposes or exam classes. So these 5 teachers had quite a lot of experience. They weren't beginner level teachers. So the initial question, how can you define an advanced learner? So here are some answers that the learners themselves provided. So the first comment is about range and also accuracy, not making mistakes. The second comment here is this idea of being able to use language in a more complete and complex way and being clear with ideas. The third example means that learners are able to actually express themselves with a degree of ease, and that there's a certain amount of variety in the language that they use. And the other one is actually to do with this idea of confidence, not feeling nervous about speaking English. Here are some example teacher answers. This idea that advanced level learners can actually are fluent and they can keep a conversation going, again with an idea of ease, similar to the learners themselves. Then we have a comment which talks about lack of accuracy. And then again, we have another comment about infelicities and errors. So not major errors, but little slips that advanced level learners might make. And also, once again, this idea of communicative ability, that they can get their ideas across, but another mention of lack of accuracy. When I looked at all the comments, all the feedback that I got from the 5 teachers and the 5 learners, I was able to break it down into what I call 5 particular themes in these definitions. The first one of these is language accuracy or lack of accuracy. The second theme that I identified was clarity of expression. And then the third one was communicative ability. The fourth one is fluency and ease, this idea that learners didn't need to hesitate in any way. And the fifth one was range of language, or indeed maybe lack of range of language. So if we go back and look at the comments, this is how I tagged them in this way. So I would look at a comment and sort of think, okay, this is the range theme or the accuracy theme. So I'll just give you a minute, or not a minute, a few seconds to have a look there, because these are the comments we've already looked at, just with the themes tagged to them. So looking at more examples: accuracy, communicative ability, and accuracy. Okay, so I now have got a task for you, and this is a prediction task, and quite a few of the tasks that I'm going to ask you to do in this webinar are really predicting some of the results I got. So it's kind of like a guessing game. So looking at these four themes here: fluency and ease, clarity and accuracy, range and communicative ability, which do you think were suggested by only the teachers? Which do you think were suggested by only the students? And which do you think were suggested by both teachers and students in the questionnaires that I gave them? So I'll just get you to type your answers into the chat box. So obviously it was different for each theme. It was not always the same. Great. Answers are coming through. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for those answers. So in order to make sure that I finish the webinar on time, I might now skip and actually show you what even if we haven't seen your answer in the chat, I'm assuming that you will have had time to think about it. So in terms of fluency and ease, both teachers and learners referred to that. In terms of clarity and accuracy, really only the learners mentioned that. In terms of range, only learners mentioned that. And in terms of communicative ability, only teachers. So this is how they responded. So why the interesting thing there is that the teachers' definitions were slightly more negative in terms of range and accuracy. So the learners were kind of more confident in terms of saying, you know, we have slightly better range, we have better accuracy, but teachers weren't as encouraging on that level. So I asked teachers about this in the tutorials that I did with them, and this is what they had to say. The first one refers to specific examples of learners. So in their minds, they were thinking about different learners they'd taught in the past, and that seemed to bring to mind a huge range of varied needs that learners have, and that often range and accuracy is not as great as one would imagine. The other comment that they made is they felt that there is quite a significant gap between someone who's at C1 level and someone who is more or less a native speaker, who is at kind of native speaker level. And they felt that an advanced level learner still had a wee way to go in terms of achieving a level where they would be as efficient, I suppose, in English as a native speaker. So they were aware of this gap. So that's why they felt, or that's why they responded perhaps in not so positive light. So let's now look at the skill needs of advanced learners. So listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So here you'll need to type this a little bit carefully. So I would like you to think of this from the point of view of how the learners responded, number one, and number two, how the teachers responded. And I would like you to rank the four skills. So if you think there was a low level of need, put 1. If you think there was a very high level of need, put 4, and then put 2 and 3 for the others. So in that particular order. So if you could now type into the chat your answers for both learners and teachers in terms of language skill needs. So we'll just need a little bit of time for people to type, because there's a little bit more typing to do with this particular task. Okay, some interesting answers coming through. Okay. And what's very interesting is that your answers are very, very different. And that's very much what I would have expected, that there's no real consensus. And as we'll see in a moment, there actually isn't consensus between what the learners felt and what the teachers felt. Okay, so once again, in the interest of time management, I realize that not everyone has had an opportunity to type their answers, but again, hopefully you've had time to think about this. So these were the results that I got. So what's interesting is that learners and teachers agreed about writing as being the skill with the greatest need. But there is a little bit of difference in the other skills, and we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail in the moment. But first, let's look at writing. So this is what learners had to say about their writing needs. These two comments are indicative of what the group of 5 felt. And in effect, it comes down to the fact that they feel that they need to be sure about their language, about their grammar, their vocabulary, collocations, idioms, all that kind of thing, in order to be able to write effectively. But the other comment is quite interesting, this idea that they feel that when they speak, they can go back and correct themselves or change what they're going to say, whereas they feel that when they write and they've printed the document or sent the email or whatever, then there is no going back and the message is there. So they need to be very, very clear about what that message is. So the teacher's comments, the first set of comments, the C word, complexity. So this idea that obviously when students write, and particularly when they're writing in more formal genre, they need to be able to use language which is grammatically more and lexically more complex than perhaps when they're speaking. They also, as teacher C indicates, they need to be aware of genre at the same time. Then here's some more comments from teachers looking at things like referencing topic sentences, etc. So here we've got things to do with cohesion and coherence. So teachers are focusing very much on the discourse aspects of writing and the fact that you need to be able to control these well in order to be able to write effectively. So both teachers and learners were saying very, very similar things. So it's the idea that writing as a skill puts a little bit more linguistic pressure on learners. And that for this reason, it was where there was the greatest need. As we've noted, there is a disparity in the speaking needs that learners and teachers had. So learners put that as number 3, so quite a high level of need, whereas in fact teachers put that as number 1, saying it wasn't that important. So what I wonder accounts for this disparity is that perhaps teachers tend to equate speaking with communicative fluency. So if a learner can actually speak and communicate well, then they can do that quite easily. But I feel, particularly having spoken to learners, I think that they see speaking as more of an idea of actually having to marshal linguistic features of the language. They had to think about pronunciation. They have to think about style, whether they're being formal or informal. They have to think about register, whether they're using the correct language in a particular context. So I think that they felt that lack of control of these linguistic features affected their ability to communicate in a negative way, and therefore they saw speaking as being more of a challenge than perhaps the teachers did. So that was quite interesting, this disparity in speaking skill needs. So let's now move on, and we're going to look at, this time we're going to focus only on learners and their language system needs. So we're looking at phonology, vocabulary, and grammar. Now, when I wrote the questionnaire, I asked both learners and teachers to focus on two aspects of each language system. The first was A, their knowledge of the language. In other words, what we might call explicit knowledge, what they know about phonology, what they know about vocabulary, what they know about grammar. And in contrast with this, I wanted them to consider their ability to use each of these language systems. So how confident were they in their ability to use phonology, vocabulary, and grammar? So what we might say implicit knowledge of these language systems. And they had to rank yet again. So number one, I know the system well. I know about the system well. To number three, I really need to develop my knowledge of this particular language system. And then in terms of use, I can use this system well. I'm confident. To three, I really need to develop my ability. So yet again, another prediction task. How do you think learners rated themselves in terms of their knowledge of the language systems, and secondly, in terms of their ability to use the language systems? So I'll just pause so you've got time to type into the chat. Okay, everyone's busy typing at the moment. Right, some answers coming through now. It's interesting that, yes, some of you are mentioning phonology, which is interesting. We're going to look at that in a moment. Okay. And again, there is some variety in your answers, as I would expect. Yes, there's quite a lot of variety. And also, I'd just like to reiterate and remind you that we are only looking at, I'm looking at results from 5 learners. So I'm not trying to generalize and say this is how it is for all advanced learners. So I always think it's interesting to compare ideas from different contexts. So let's see what the learners had to say about this. Their replies were quite neat in the sense that there is a direct relationship between how much they felt they knew about one of the language systems in relation to their ability to use it. So quite a few of you before were focusing on pronunciation, and in fact this is what they saw as their greatest area of need in terms of knowing about pronunciation, but also their ability to use pronunciation well and feel confident with it. They didn't feel confident at all, which I was quite surprised by. So let's now contrast this with the 5 teachers, what their perceptions of the language system needs were. And they acknowledged, the teachers acknowledged, that probably the learners knew very little about pronunciation. However, what's interesting is they didn't feel, obviously, that this affects their ability to use pronunciation effectively. And they felt that vocabulary and grammar were of equal need in terms of language systems. So this is quite interesting. So clearly, between the learners and the teachers, there are very different views on pronunciation. I think that the teachers believe that the lack of knowledge on pronunciation didn't really affect their ability to use the system in any way. But learners obviously felt, because they didn't know about it, they weren't confident. So I was very interested in this and quite surprised by this, because I think that my own personal answer to that question, if I'd been responding to the questionnaire, would have been in line with the teachers, insofar as I wouldn't have thought that pronunciation was a great area of need, but it is. So I followed up and asked learners some questions. I thought perhaps that it might be sounds that were problematic for learners, but they said no, sounds were not the problem. What they feel is most challenging is stress and intonation. And as the comment says here, you need to be completely correct with stress and tones. I know that that makes a difference for native speakers, but maybe we don't notice it. And one of the things that they indicated is that they feel that if they get the stress or the intonation wrong, that they can be misinterpreted in some way, and that someone that they're talking to may get the wrong message. And they were very, very aware of this. Another point that I was interested in terms of pronunciation, one thought that occurred to me before I spoke to the learners in the tutorials, is whether the issue of pronunciation was an issue of accent, of whether they felt that their first language accent was a problem. Was it a problem in terms of them feeling that they lost their identity, or was it a problem in the sense that they wanted to be able to speak in a very neutral way so that no one would identify their accent? And this is what they had to say. So one of the learners said, I've been chasing to sound like a native speaker. She agreed that, her identity of the accent of her first language is important. But what she wanted was this idea of control, that basically she could increase her accent or decrease her accent as she saw fit, and she would be able to attain a kind of a neutral accent. And another learner in the group said a very, very similar thing, where she felt that she didn't want to be identified immediately as a Thai speaker of English, or a German speaker of English, or a Portuguese speaker of English, that they would be very, very neutral. And then if someone actually found out a little bit later on, that was fine. So what came through was this idea that learners were actually very keen also to control their accent. They didn't always want to sound like a native speaker, but they wanted to feel that they had control over that particular language system. I mentioned this focus on pronunciation to the teacher group that I worked with, and I asked them if they focused on pronunciation with advanced level learners, and if they didn't, why not? And this was a point of view that most agree with, and in fact I think I would probably have agreed with if I had been in the tutorial, not leading the tutorial, but participating. So one teacher said, we tend to do drills at lower levels, elementary at lower levels, but when it comes to teaching advanced levels, you feel if I start drilling them, it's a little bit weird. And interestingly enough, the advanced level learners that I spoke to, the 5 learners, actually didn't have a problem with being drilled. They felt quite comfortable with the idea of repeating language in a controlled way. Obviously complex language, and they wanted to focus very much on stress and intonation, but they would have been quite happy to be drilled and to get feedback on their pronunciation in this way. So I have to say that this information has slightly changed my thinking and my perspective about advanced level learners, because I have thought in the past, very much in line with the comment that's on screen at the moment, but having carried out this case study, I think I would now check with advanced level learners, if I've got a class, whether they would like to be drilled and have that kind of controlled practice of pronunciation. I wouldn't automatically just go in and do it. I would check first of all. But in the past, I probably would not have thought to check. So that was quite interesting in terms of language systems. So I then moved on, and I would like to move on now and look at learning preferences. And in particular, first of all, I'd like to look at materials, the kind of materials that these learners like to use. So what I did, looking at their questionnaires, I isolated 3 particular language points that learners had indicated were areas of need, specific areas of need for them. So they all felt that they wanted writing skills development that included some kind of grammar focus. They also felt that they wanted to do some work on pronunciation and stress and intonation, as we've seen already. And the other language area was idioms. So in effect, we've got skills work, writing, but we've also got grammar, pronunciation, and idioms, looking at that vocabulary. So in many ways, we've covered all 4 language systems, if you include discourse as a language system as well. So what I did is I found pieces of material. So for each language point, writing and grammar, pronunciation, and idioms, I found an activity A where the learners were looking at sentence level examples of, associated with that language point. And then I chose activity B, and this was looking at that language point in context. So the language point was embedded in a broader context, a listening text or a reading text. So for each language point, they got these 2 activities. So this is a much quicker task, involves far less typing, you'll be relieved to know. So do you think learners preferred the activities with only sentence level examples or examples in a broader context? And why do you think that's the case? So we've got quite a few B's, a few A's coming through. Okay. Okay, so I think maybe on balance, yeah, there's both A's and B's, maybe a little bit more A than B. Okay, it's really interesting, and some nice ideas here as to, easy to remember, it's more challenging, provides a context, it's more controlled. Okay, thank you again for these answers. So this is what my learners felt. I'm not saying this is how it is for all learners. This is what the 5 learners I spoke to felt. They preferred activity B. They preferred to see these language points in some kind of context. The reason why is because they wanted to see how that particular, like idioms or the pronunciation or the grammar and writing, how it kind of fitted together with other bits of language. And their reasons were, they said it was closer to reality. So there's this idea of authenticity. They felt that the language is more authentic and therefore more interesting and more useful and closer to what a native speaker would be doing. So they were very keen to see these language points in context, which were the kinds of contexts that native speakers might engage with. Then the other thing that's interesting, the other point which the second comment indicates, is the fact that they felt that if the language was in context in some kind, they would be able to look at that context and actually get extra language points. They'd be exposed to more grammar, more vocabulary, collocations, that kind of thing. So they saw that these texts were a source of language, not only for the language point they're focusing on, idioms, for example, but also for other bits of language that they could actually look at. So they had a definite preference for these language-rich environments. Now, in the follow-up discussion on materials, there was some good news for us, good news for teachers. And they were quite clear about the fact that with both activities, and in particular the activity B, they felt that these activities would be more successful if they were delivered or taught by a teacher. So one of the learners sort of said, it's very confusing to try and do it on your own. But one of the learners, I thought this was a very insightful comment. She kind of said that when she looked at the activities, she initially thought these are a little bit boring. And then she thought, oh no, but this is the kind of activity that I typically do in class with my teacher. I actually enjoy these activities. So what this indicates is that our ability to kind of mediate and bring material to life, to get it off the page, has some real value for learners, and they appreciate it. So this was I thought, rather heartening comment for teachers, and I was very happy to hear it. Okay, another task, self-study. I was very interested in the degree to which these advanced level learners were independent learners. And we looked at a range of strategies, and they talked about a range of strategies that they would use in order to be able to learn independently outside the classroom. And I've listed 5 of these here. Now, one of these they did not agree with. They didn't feel was a particularly useful independent learning strategy. And I'd like you to guess which one they felt was less useful. Great, some lots of answers coming through. Okay. Yes, now it's very interesting because a lot of you are choosing activity 4, keeping a vocabulary notebook, and in fact that is the one independent learning strategy that they felt was less successful. So I've often in the past spent quite a bit of time encouraging learners to keep a vocabulary notebook, and this did make me slightly rethink all the effort that I might have put into that in the past. It was quite interesting. Now, one of the things that I was interested in is the fact that by far the most popular independent learning strategy that these learners had involved actually interacting with native or fluent speakers. That was their preferred self-study choice. But as we've already noted, a lot of the needs that they expressed were to do with kind of language accuracy and focusing on accuracy. So this was, I felt there was a kind of a little bit of a mismatch between the two, and I asked them about this. And what they indicated quite clearly is the fact that they feel, well, not what they feel, is so much what they do, is when they're listening to very fluent speakers of English, they're often not only listening to the message, but they're also listening to the language that that speaker is producing and actually following the grammar or trying to listen for little bits of vocabulary. And there was one lovely example which came up in our discussion, which I'm going to show you now. So one of the learners had gone to school to collect her son. So she was studying in New Zealand and her son was attending a New Zealand primary school. And she spoke to another parent who was a native speaker who she'd become friendly with when they were waiting for the children outside school. And she said, yesterday my friend told me that he's a little bit under the weather. And at first I think, what weather? So I got a dictionary and then I learned it. So this is a lovely example of her hearing the idiom under the weather, being confused by it, checking it in the dictionary and actually learning it. And we talked about the fact that she was probably always going to remember this particular idiom because of the way in which she had learned it. So this is a very nice example of an advanced level learner listening to a fluent speaker of English and actually listening for language and following up. So I think this is a nice example. So do advanced level learners know it all? And I think no, they don't. And what my discussions with them, they revealed a real desire for language input. So what they feel that they need and want is challenging grammar and vocabulary. And in particular, they felt a strong emphasis on style, on the appropriate level of formality and register, of knowing which language can be used in different contexts. So this came through very, very strongly in the discussion, how hungry these learners were for language input. Finally, I'd like to look at the methodology. So many online forums, if you go online and you look for hints of how to manage and teach advanced level learners, they will often look at these kinds of things. Projects, reading groups, keeping journals or blogs, word grammar searches, learners teach a language to each other, video projects. So I'd just be interested in your comments in terms of how effective you think these ideas are with advanced level learners. So some of you have used one or two of these. So everyone's busy typing at the moment. So quite a few of you mentioned 5, where they actually teach a language lesson to each other. Video projects. All of them are useful. Okay. So there's quite a lot of, a lot of you have got quite a bit of experience using some or all of these, which is fantastic. So I asked for learners' thoughts on these because a lot of these ideas, the methodology of these resources suggest a strong task-based learner-centered focus with advanced level learners. So I asked them how they felt about this kind of activity. And I have to say that they weren't, the learners I spoke to weren't that keen with a lot of these activities. So the first comment here, this learner, she felt that she needed to work on writing, and she felt that she actually wanted to do this on her own because trying to do it in a sort of a task-based group environment would cause her confusion. And she felt that she already got confused just on her own. So, doing a sort of a task with other learners would be even more confusing. The other comment that they made, and this really is a comment, I think, relevant to the fact that I was conducting this case study in New Zealand, in other words, an English-speaking country. A lot of the learners felt that if they just wanted to do kind of task-based sort of freer speaking and things like that, that they could actually do this after school and they could talk to each other after school. So they were a little bit lukewarm about a lot of these ideas. I think this is a fair comment. They like to do activities in small groups, but they do like to consider what the aim of the activity. But the key thing that came through is this idea that if they were going to do something in a small group or in pairs, some kind of task, that eventually they would want some feedback from the teacher. And as I've taken this as the title of this webinar, that they want feedback, or else what's the point of having a class? So yes, they're interested, these learners were interested in a degree of student-centered activity, a task of some kind, but at a certain point they wanted feedback on their language from the teacher. And I think this is an interesting point because they were unanimous on this. Previously, I've done a webinar on learning-oriented assessment. That webinar is called Tuning into Your Learners, and it's available on the Cambridge English Empower website. It's freely available if you want to find out about that in a little bit more detail. But learners' comments here, to me, suggest that an LOA approach to methodology is suitable. So I'll just quickly recap on what I mean by this. So learning-oriented assessment is a way of looking at the language and the behavior of learners, and a teacher assesses or evaluates that because they want to find out what they should do next with learners, what should be the next thing that they actually focus on. So as a result of the assessment or the evaluation, they think about the learning that's to come. They orient it towards learning. And as a result, assessment or evaluation is part of the learning process. So that's broadly speaking how LOA can be defined. So let's very quickly look at how it works. And I've used this diagram in the webinar on learning-oriented assessment. So in effect, the learners do a task, the teachers observe They note how well the learners are doing tasks. They decide what they're going to do. They give feedback to the learners, what these advanced learners want. And then on the basis of that feedback, the teacher would modify objectives for the advanced level learners. So obviously we're going around in this loop, but I think it's interesting in the LOA cycle to note the degree to which the teacher is observing, making a note of things, making decisions, and providing feedback. And the advanced level learners that I spoke to were very, very interested in that kind of teacher behavior. They want the teacher to be engaged in that way during the course of the lesson. So we've come to some final points here. As I said, these points cannot be generalized to embrace all advanced learners. These are merely the key points arising from my case study, and this is just information that I wanted to share with you to get you thinking about your own advanced level learners. So the three key points for me were the degree to which they found pronunciation, in particular stress and intonation, very important, and they really wanted to focus on those. That, I have to say, surprised me in terms of a language need. The degree, point two, the degree to which these learners really are hungry for language. They want language input, they want to be corrected, they want feedback, they want to understand more complex language issues. And the third point, which, as I've mentioned before, is good news for us teachers, is that they like us, and they want us there in the classroom, mediating the learning process. They want to be taught, and they want us to give feedback on the language. So they see a very, very clear role for us in the classroom. So I think that's a nice outcome from this particular case study. They still want us, they still like us. But we must remember, the group was small, the learners were studying in an English-speaking country, so I think that probably the issues and needs that advanced level learners would have in a non-English speaking country in a monolingual environment would be significantly different. The other thing is, I feel that with this case study, I was very lucky, and I found 5 learners who were very articulate, very self-aware, and very generous in the way that they kind of shared their thoughts and ideas with me. I don't imagine any of them are listening now, but in case they are, I would like to thank them. I was very, very grateful for their contributions. So what can we generalize from this? And I think the thing that we can generalize is the value in doing thorough needs analysis with learners at this level. So what I'd like to propose here to finish off is a kind of, I suppose, a kind of methodology for needs analysis, which is perhaps a little bit more comprehensive than I might have done myself in the past. So the first step in terms of dealing with needs analysis is to make sure that the terminology that you're using in the questionnaire is clear to your learners, and if necessary, provide them with examples with exactly what you mean. Then give learners plenty of time to think about the questions, what information you're getting, and I would also suggest perhaps getting them to discuss some of the points together before they actually fill in the form, so that they've really thought about and teased out their ideas. And the interesting thing is, I think that the teacher who managed the questionnaire when I handed it out, she did that. And although the learners discussed in groups, they didn't all put down the same ideas. The discussion, I think, just helps them tease out those concepts in a clear way, so they have a good understanding. Then obviously the key thing to do is, when you look at the information you get, is try to keep an open mind and try and work out if there are some kind of patterns there. I think that in the past, sometimes when I've seen needs analysis done, often what's happening is, it takes about 20 minutes and it's all done very quickly. And I have to say that I myself have often conducted needs analysis in that way. And I think by contrast with the case study, it's interesting to look at things in a little bit more depth. And then, if possible, try to do a follow-up discussion, ask more questions, probe, go a little bit more deeply into some of the issues that they bring up in the questionnaire. And I think that you will be surprised. One of the things that surprised me in a very, very positive way was the incredible awareness these learners had of methodology and what we teachers do in the classroom. And I think perhaps as English language teachers, we tend to forget that we are being observed all the time by our learners, and they are processing information and making judgments about us. And a lot of the judgments that they're making are really quite smart, and they're really useful to know about. So talking to your learners in this way, finding out about their needs, finding their perspectives, and doing this case study, I found a very enriching and very valuable experience for me. So that's where I'd like to finish, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that may have come up.
Okay, thanks very much, Craig. We're experimenting slightly with microphones here, but how's the... okay. Okay, I hope that everyone can hear me okay. Please type in the chat if not. First question from KP Wee, who says, when giving feedback, do you prefer to give feedback in groups or on an individual basis?
That depends, I think, on the nature of the language that you might be feeding back. I think that learners would always have a preference to get individual feedback. The more personalized and individual it is, particularly at advanced level, where often the needs are quite different. So if it's possible, I think that individual feedback probably is preferable. However, I'm also mindful of the fact that that is time consuming, and that sometimes it might be more efficient to actually give feedback to the group as a whole. So for example, if you have done some kind of practice activity where you wanted learners to use some idioms, your feedback actually might just include feedback to the group in which you sort of say, well, I heard X number of examples of these idioms, and these were the ones that you was kind of missing, so perhaps you need to think about it again. So it does depend on the nature of the language point and the nature of the activity, but it also depends on time management for you as an individual teacher. So I don't think there's any rule there. I think it's very much dependent on the context.
Okay, thanks very much. Question now from Christine Sutro-Chandley, who asks, how can you encourage advice?
I think that you need to provide them with lots of practice activities. Often we touch on language points and we often do a little bit of practice and then move on. And I think that sometimes the practice needs to be delayed. So often I will do one practice activity from the course book, but not another. I will save it up and maybe do it 2 days later, because that's often the time when learners perhaps have forgotten what the language point is, and that can act as a reminder. But also you can, in this day and age, you can actually set homework where learners do role plays and record themselves, and they can send the audio files to you. So that is perhaps another way, particularly if you're trying to deal with pronunciation issues, that you could perhaps encourage some kind of consolidation by setting speaking homeworks, because often just doing a written grammar gapful activity or vocabulary gapful activity won't involve the learner actually using the language. And at this higher level, learners often need to be kind of pushed to use new language.
Okay, thanks. Question now from Tanya Brown, who says, it's very difficult to choose a proper textbook for advanced learners. Can you suggest some, please?
Well, yes, I can suggest the one that I wrote, Cambridge English Empower. So thank you for your question, Tanya. So have a look at Empower. We've tried to, Cambridge English Empower, we've tried to address advanced level learner needs in that course book. And it does actually adopt a learning-oriented assessment methodology, and there are lots of notes in the teacher's book that actually supports teachers to adopt a learning-oriented assessment approach. But I mean, in effect, I think one of the problems with advanced level course books in general is there's never one course book that's going to meet your needs. So you need to find a good enough course book. I mean, a very good course book, one that's going to interest your learners and engage them. But often you will need to supplement it a little bit and maybe use at advanced level. You can obviously use some authentic material to supplement the course book and in order to address learners' individual needs. But I would strongly suggest that you look at Cambridge English Empower.
Thanks. And a follow-up question from Christine, who asks whether Empower prepares for the advanced CAE exam.
No, because it's a general English course and it's not an exam preparation book. So I think that for CAE you need, or Cambridge Advanced, you actually need a proper preparation course. However, in terms of advanced level learners actually doing a general English course and then prior to embarking on a Cambridge Advanced course, I think that Cambridge English Empower leads very well to that. The other thing that Cambridge English Empower has is an assessment package that comes with it, which provides online progress tests and competency-based tests, which in fact many of them are self-managing. They save a lot of time for the teacher. So I think that the assessment package that comes with Cambridge English Empower really puts students in a good place before they embark on a Cambridge Advanced preparation course.
Question now from Alexandra Sladkowska, who says, how can we show advanced learners their progress?
I think by giving feedback, that can be a very, very useful way of doing it. So that means when you're giving feedback, it needs to be both positive as well as developmental, obviously. So often it helps also if you can get learners to establish individual learning goals, so objectives that they actually want to achieve, and then come back and revisit those goals and say, oh, look, you've actually managed to achieve that. So that gives a tangible idea of progress. But again, with, as I mentioned before, Cambridge English Empower has an assessment package that comes with it. And the progress tests, which students do online, give automatic feedback to learners, and then they get to actually retake the progress test, having done some more practice. And what all of our trialing of this assessment package has indicated, that learners always do better on their second attempt of the test, because they've been guided towards doing specific practice activities online. So that is the assessment package that comes with Empower is a very good way of showing learners very tangible progress that they're making.
Thank you very much. Just got time for one more question. We've had a couple of requests for suggestions for helping students with their writing skills at this level. Do you have any particular final ideas on that, please?
It's very difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all. But a key thing to do is identify, in learners' writing, I think really it does need to be on a needs basis, is to identify very specific writing sub-skills that learners are having problems with. So what is the issue for a group of learners or even an individual learner? Is it to do with the way that they organize information, in other words, coherence? Because often teachers think that it's grammar, but actually the grammar is mostly okay. The real problem of why the text is difficult to understand is because the learner hasn't organized their information effectively. Also, you could look at something like cohesion. Is that working well? But it could be paragraphing. It could be linking words. So I really think, particularly at this higher level, it does need to be on a needs-only basis. The other thing that I think is important to help motivate learners in terms of writing and address needs is to use genre that they are perhaps using in their day-to-day lives. So particular things like social media postings, or it could be making a contribution to a blog or a discussion board or something along those lines. Because I think if learners can see the relevance of writing and the need to communicate using written form, using information technology, that can help enormously. And again, focus on what specific language skills learners need in order to write more successfully. A few months ago, I did a webinar on writing skills and looking specifically at e-genre. And again, this is available on the Cambridge English and Power homepage on the Cambridge University Press website. So there are more ideas there in terms of actually how you can help learners with their writing skills.
Okay, thank you very much, Craig. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but it's been a really interesting session. I'm sorry we weren't able to answer more of your questions. And don't forget that you can join us next week at the same time for a webinar on learning-oriented assessment and technology with Evelina Galacti. You can sign up for our future webinars by visiting our events page, cambridge.org/ELT events. And the recording of today's webinar should be live on our blog and YouTube channel on Friday, and we'll send you a certificate by Tuesday. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thanks to my colleagues Eleanor for live tweeting and Laura for helping moderation. And thank you most of all to Craig for another really interesting session. Thanks very much, Craig.